Hello, hello. So, I'm really sorry about all of the weirdness with the videos, the way I've been releasing them. I had an issue with the storage on my phone, which you guys don't need to hear about all that. But I got it fixed, so yay. Anyway, so just like I bet a lot of you probably thought I was gonna give up and not do more, but I'm back, baby. So I want to continue. Oh my god, I have so much to talk about, but I want to at least finish uh, my previous video, just so it's all done, and then I'll move on to other topics, and then God willing, it's going to be in single videos. It's not going to be stretched out like this. But okay, so what I was last talking about when we last left off was how Yasser Arafat founded the Palestinian Liberation Organization in the 1960s, and he realized that the jihadist Islamist sort of hardcore uh, sort of mindset was not going to work, and was not going to get people, like the people that he needed on his side. So what he did is he realized that, with the hippies and love and all that stuff was happening, and he realized that it was now like cool and like the in thing to stand up for indigenous people and people who were victims and underdogs. And so he concocted this whole notion that they're going to recast the battle between the Jews and the Arabs, that they're going to recast it as that the Arabs that lived in Israel were actually this indigenous group of people. See, I'm getting right back into it. This indigenous group of people called the Palestinians, and that they have these deep, ancient, thousands of years roots in this land, and that that they live. It's their home. They've been there for thousands of years. That that they're, what's the word? But yes, indigenous, but like it's like they're one with the land, like they're organic. That's the word. It's like they're inseparable. He wanted people to get that idea, and then he reframed the Zionist project as, oh, well, what really happened, because the way everyone knows it happened is the Jews were victims for thousands of years. They suffered so many things all around the world, and then culminating ultimately in the worst of the worst, the Holocaust. And then the whole world felt so guilty and so bad for what had happened to the Jews during the Holocaust that the leader of the Western free world, America and Britain, that they just sort of collaborated and just decided to give what was then controlled by the British, the British mandate of Transjordan and Palestine. They just decided to just give it to the Jews to make up for the Holocaust, because the Jews had been through a lot, and they really needed, they felt bad for the Jews. They were sad for them. They were angry at what had happened to them. So out of the kindness of their hearts, they gave them Palestine. But the problem was, when they gave them Palestine, there were already another group of people living there, that it was their country, called Palestinians, that had lived there for centuries. And when these European Jews, these white European Jews, backed up by the colonialist powers of Britain and America, came to Palestine, they drove out these Arabs, and stole their homes and raped their women, and essayed, assault of Palestinian women, this whole thing. There's a movie on Netflix called, oh God, what's it called? It's not Fauda, because Fauda's, it's similar. I'm gonna look it up. But there's a movie on Netflix, and the movie is the story of a Palestinian girl in a village during the Nakba. What is the Nakba? The Nakba is the name that the Palestinians gave when they lost the War of Independence. What we call Yom Ha'atzmaut, the Israeli Independence Day. Now, in their version, which is it's in this movie, for example, that the Zionists came and they greedily robbed and stole all the land from the Arabs and exiled people and massacred people and all this stuff. So the movie is told through the perspective of a Palestinian girl who is hiding in a little closet or a little cupboard because the Zionists have invaded her village, and the whole movie is her helplessly watching as people hide in fear and hide in terror, and the way it ends is that even after promising to not harm anybody, the Zionist soldiers decided, we're going to harm them anyway. And then they line up a family which included old paralyzed woman that they ordered at gunpoint the two young men to lift her up out of her wheelchair to hold her up basically because she's a paraplegic, so to hold her up, and then another woman with a baby to stand there, and they're lining them up to shoot them, and the father, is going, "No, you promised you wouldn't hurt us. Please, I swear we don't have any weapons. We're not fighters. We're not fighters." And they just gun them all down. And then, just to make it even more just extra sick, after they gun them down, it's silence. And of course, Fadua, or whatever her name was, I'm gonna look it up, has been watching, and she's all like, oh, and you see the tears running down her face, and the whole thing. It's all dramatic, and then it's silent. And then, suddenly, you hear a baby crying. The baby that was being held. So, one of the soldiers walks up to shoot it, and the guy goes, "Don't waste good bullets," and he stomps it. And as he does it 3 times, and the first time you just hear, "Ah!" and then he does it again, and then you hear, "Ah!" and then he does it again, and you hear, "Ah!" and then he does it once more, and then he goes, and he lights up a cigarette and walks away. And then the credits, right before the credits roll, the girl curls up, with her knees, with her knees to her chest, and just lays down, in a fetal position and just sobs. And then that's the end of the movie. Now, there's a big problem with this story and with this whole movie, in that it's a total and complete fabrication. There's absolutely no reliable evidence whatsoever behind any of this story. The story is completely made up out of thin air by whoever these producers are who made this garbage. It's not a true story. There's nothing even remotely like it. There's a couple other stories that you'll hear about the Nakba, the Holocaust of the Palestinian people. I heard a story, I can't remember, I was listening to a podcast, and somebody mentioned that they had talked to a Palestinian from back then who said that the Zionist soldiers, when they were conquering Palestine, at one point, they were invading this village, and this father wouldn't give up his child, so they forced the baby away from the father's arms, and then they said, we were going to let all of you live, but because you resisted, and then he said they threw the baby screaming into the flames. Again, this story is based on nothing. It's not, there's no sources for it. Go look. I've tried to find the sources for this. If you go on certain websites, you can find long lists with date after date after date after date after date of various massacres that apparently were carried out against the Palestinians by the Zionist forces. Again, I've researched these dates. I've looked up these massacres. Most of the time, it was part of the War of Independence, and it was what's the word? Not critical. Not casual. Like civilians were hurt, but that was not the intention. They were caught in the middle. There was, or it was either something like that, or it was just nothing. It was just somebody wrote on this site and said this thing happened. There's no source for it anywhere. I mean, nothing. Not even the flimsiest. I really tried to look. Before October 7th and all of this started, I was actually extremely pro two-state solution and pro-Palestinian. My father and I argued a lot about the politics and the history and all of that. October 7th really changed things for me. Really changed my perspective on a lot of it. In some ways it did. In some ways it didn't. But I'll get into that in the future. That's not the point of this video. Anyway, there's one last thing to add into all this. I was on a website, I think it was the Electronic Intifada, and they had this whole thing about how the Zionists are always saying that we're gonna push them into the sea. Well, did you know that there was a time when the Zionists literally did push us into the sea? And then there's this whole story about how the Zionist forces again stopped a boat and quarantined it, kidnapped the Palestinians on it, and then just pushed them off, just threw them overboard to drown, and laughed at them and watched them drown. Again, there's no source for this. Nothing. No Palestinian source. And I tried to find the source on the website. There was nothing beyond the author's article. There was nothing. She had no. You would think, well, maybe there's in the resources, maybe there's a bibliography. Every article of every respectable organization has all kinds of stuff at the bottom where you can find out more information, and all that. There's always something. No, there was nothing. It was nothing. It was just, if all there was this author and who she is, and she's some Palestinian, activist or whatever. So they're just making this stuff up. And then people buy it and people go, oh my God, I didn't know that happened. Yeah, because it didn't happen. These are lies. What actually happened with the whole Palestinian refugee thing, what really happened was that the Palestinians started a war against the Jews. They said, no, we don't want to. The day after it was voted that Israel should become allowed to become a Jewish state. And again, remember, earlier on, the Balfour Declaration, which people make to be a much more big deal than it really was, people make such a huge deal out of that. The Balfour Declaration was not an official proclamation of the empire and that had been long in the works. It was kind of, if anything, it was just a one-off by General Balfour. It was not meant to be this solid, historical, written in stone thing like people portray it as. But what it was a simple proposition to partition the land between the Arabs and the Jews. And the Jews reacted to the plan by saying, cool, we'll take it. And the Arabs said, if it means having a Jewish state anywhere on the land, even if we do have our own Arab state, but there being a Jewish state at all, period, so no, we reject it. And then the very next day, they launched a war against Israel, backed up by the army of 5 Arab nations, who all invaded Israel, and everybody was like, well, this is it. Israel is going to be like, there were people who were going, yeah, we knew this would happen. No, what, do we think this would actually work? And then Israel amazed everybody. They fought on, and they beat them, and they won the war. And then, in the course of the war, the Arabs spread all kinds of misinformation and all sorts of propaganda, backed, interestingly enough, by the Soviet Union, financed by a lot of the anti-Israel propaganda is actually nothing more than a rehashing of anti-Semitic Soviet propaganda. But that's a whole other issue. We'll get to that much later in a different video, probably. No, but what happened with was that they spread all this misinformation, and they one of the things that they were spreading the misinformation of, and this is how this whole story of these massacres got started, is that they started making up all these lies, the Arab armies, about villages being burned and people being raped and essayed and beheaded and all the stuff that Hamas actually did on October 7th. And they said, don't worry, it's go flee. You won't be caught in the fighting. You won't, and we'll come in and we'll fight. We'll defeat the Jews and we'll defeat the Zionist forces, and then you can come back to your homes and it'll all be, copacetic. But obviously that didn't happen because the Jews won the war and beat the Arabs. And then 780,000 Palestinians of the population that had been living there, I don't want to say the native population, but the local residents who had been there for centuries, which I'm not denying. I want to make something clear. I'm not denying that Arabs have any right to live in the land of Israel whatsoever. I do believe that Arabs, including the Palestinian Arabs, have a right to live in Israel. I absolutely believe that. I have not changed my belief about that in particular. But again, that's sort of part of the rest later on in this video. We're not quite there yet. But so then they lost the war, and Israel obviously didn't allow them back. Now, I used to have this argument with my dad, actually, and other people, that I used to say that was wrong of Israel, that Israel should have allowed them to come back, because now the whole world can look at Israel and go, well, look what they did. Look what Israel did to them. They didn't even allow them back. Like, how can we... I couldn't come up with a way to defend that morally. Fine, they did flee and Israel won. But they should still come back and live in their house and, have their clothes and sleep in their beds and live in their neighborhoods and drink from their wells and have their communities. All of that should be still allowed. They shouldn't be banished from returning to where they lived. Imagine if someone kicked you out of your house and told you couldn't come back. That's the way I felt about it. However, something that people seem to not mention Israel is actually not under, and was not under, the obligation to return their property to them, because they're the ones that started the war in the first place. And when you win and you conquer territory from your enemy, it legally becomes yours. And we're not talking about, see, they want to make it sound like Israel came and stole it from all these civilians. But that's not what happened. It was a war. It was a war with the Palestinian Arabs and backed up by 5 Arab armies. And Israel beat all of them. The Palestinians were the enemies. Their goal was the destruction of the Jews and the prevention of the Jewish state. That was the whole point of the war, and they lost. The Nakba, which they call it, is not a catastrophe in which the Palestinians were cruelly ethnically cleansed from their land. The Nakba is actually the result of the Palestinian Arabs' refusal to accept anywhere whatsoever, in any way, shape, or form, a sovereign, autonomous Jewish presence in the land. So it's not a tragedy of people that lost their homes. Yes, they did lose their homes and it was tragic, but that's not what the Nakba primarily is. The Nakba, they want you to see it as they want you to view it as that the tragedy of the Nakba is that the Jews stole Palestine from the Palestinian Arabs. But in reality, and if you study the history, actually the catastrophe is that they lost the war to the Jews. That's what the Nakba was. The catastrophe is not that they were kicked off their land. The catastrophe is that they lost the war and the Jews won the war. That's what the Nakba is to them. That's what the Nakba really is. Of course, they won't tell you any of this. Now, another thing I always argued is that, no, I'm not going to go through the Yom Kippur War and the Intifada and every detail of that. That's not the purpose of these video of this video or these series of the video. No. The purpose of this video is just to explain Palestinianism and what it is really. And so, but without all this history, it's very hard to understand any of it. So that's why. Now, okay, when they lost the war, I talked about the thing about them coming home. Another thing that I used to argue with my dad and in general about was that I used to say that what Israel should do is Israel should relinquish the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem as an independent Palestinian state. Just give it to them. No holds barred, no tricks, no strings attached. Just give it to them. Give it to them. It's yours. Do whatever your heart's content is. Completely 100% free. Do whatever you want. It's yours. Enjoy it. I always argued they should do that because then, if they do start a war with Israel, the world will see it's 2 independent nations going to war with each other, and they can no longer say, oh, the Palestinians are the underdog because they don't have a state. Now, it would be more legitimate in their minds, because it would be 2 states going to war, right? That was what I always said. And the argument that was the main argument that always convinced me before I became a 2-state sort of minded, a 2-stater, a 2-statenik, if you will, is uh, is that this notion that, well, we can't give them any of it, because if we give them any of it, whatever we give them, they won't accept that. They'll just use that and they'll turn it into a giant terror base so that they could take more of the land. And once I became a two-stater, I started to go, well, I mean, maybe, but does that even sound realistic? When has that ever happened, like, in history? I mean, that just sounds like it doesn't make much sense. And I started to go, okay, well, I started to say, well, still, let's give it to them and then deal with it if that happens. But that's such a bizarre, dumb, far-off, crazy thing that I realistically did not see that as actually being a real possibility at that point in my thinking. So, let's go forward. We've got the First and Second Intifada, numerous peace deals turned down, wars between the Palestinians, etc., and Israel, etc. Then eventually, in 2005, like we were just talking about with the state thing, is that they said, okay, fine. Israel said, we're going to remove everybody from Gaza, all the Jews, and we're going to give it to you guys, to the Palestinians. You guys can have it, all of it. The entire Gaza Strip is yours, no strings attached. Gigs unto hay, enjoy. And not only did they do that, but they actually forced over 10,000 Jewish settlers to leave. I mean, literally forced. There were people that were literally by force dragged out of the synagogue, dragged out of their homes. There's pictures of men holding Torah scrolls, crying, men and women, people duking it out with the IDF beating people because, they weren't, for resisting. And they pulled out, they forced all of them out. All of them, not one single solitary Jew remained in the Gaza Strip. It was completely handed over to the Palestinians to do whatever they desired with it. And then they got their state. They were given their state, finally. So then what happened? Well, remember a few minutes ago how I said it was just so crazy and unrealistic and that there's no way they would do something weird like that, like turn a country into a whole terrorist state? How would you even do that? That doesn't even make any sense. Well, that's exactly what they did. They spent the next 20 plus years building one of the largest underground tunnel systems in history, one of the most sophisticated and complex underground networks in existence today, rivaling the New York subway system, so that they could transport weapons and fighters and terrorize Israelis. And this eventually culminated in the horrific massacres of October 7th. So we did give them a state. They built it into a giant terror state, launched a vicious war against Israel, and so here we are now. Now we're up to this point. Okay. Now that we've gone through all of that history and everything, are you starting to see why the ideology of Palestinianism is incompatible with peace, with Israel, with the Jewish people? Because their desire is not an independent Palestinian state as much as their desire is there to not be a Jewish state. Why else would they have turned down over a dozen proposals to have their own state? Why, instead of taking Gaza in 2005, and like people say, turning it into the Singapore of the Middle East, or like Trump said, the Riviera of the Middle East, they could have done that. They could have made Gaza something really, really beautiful. But instead, they spent 20 plus years building one of the world's most complex underground tunnel systems so that they could sneak into Israel and ambush and kidnap soldiers and eventually launch a massive attack and slaughter 1,200 innocent people, kidnapping 260 people, killing babies, beheading people, burning people alive. And now, as you know, as I'm sure you've all seen in the news, murdering a woman and her baby and her two little children, 4 years old and 1 year old, and murdering them. I mean, but yet here we are, you know? And so how can we make peace with people who it's like the whole identity, the entire Palestine. Okay, I want to talk about something now. If you try to research like Palestinian history and culture and all that, there's almost nothing, actually there is nothing, before 1947, really. The entire Palestinian identity is solely predicated around the destruction of the Jewish state and that they're not being a state for the Jewish people, that they're not even in any tiniest inch of the land. I mean, think about it. There's no history of Palestinian kings and queens. There's no history of a Palestinian nobility. There's no history of anything like that whatsoever. There's never even been a place called Palestine as a country. It's existed as a region, and it's had many different people, and it's always been very diverse and multicultural, and it's always had a very mixed group of people living there. Even after Islamization and Arabization of the Middle East, there were Armenians, there were Turks, there were, of course, like Jews. It's always been a very mixed area. This concept, pardon me, this concept that there was ever this singular place with these singular ethnic group of people called the Palestinians with their kingdom and all of that and their borders and everything, it's a pure fantasy. That's never been the case. I will not accept anything. I don't accept that that's ever been the case, not because of my own personal opinion, but because of the historical record. But also, notice I am also not arguing, well, it was all Jews, only Jews, always, and that's the way it always should be. And we need to restore it to that. I'm not arguing that. I legitimately don't want that. I do want Israel to be a legitimately free, democratic, multicultural, multi-ethnic state with different groups of people living together: Jews, Arabs, Armenians, Muslims, Christians, atheists, everybody, all the different groups, but united under one united Israeli identity. That's what I would love to see. I believe in a one-state solution. Now, I used to believe in the two-state solution. Now I believe in a one-state solution. I want a strong and autonomous independent Jewish state that acknowledges the rights of the Jewish people to live in their ancestral homeland, that is also open to and made up of and gives complete freedom and equality and independence to every other group as well. And now, you're saying, well, wait a minute, Moshe, because think about this. Think about what you're saying. If you do that, technically, wouldn't that one day hypothetically mean someday maybe there could wind up being an Arab Muslim prime minister of Israel? If it was done that way, and then there would be an Arab Muslim prime minister representing the Jewish state? Is that what you're saying that you would be cool with, Moshe? Is that your vision? Would you accept that? Well, this may ruffle a few feathers, but absolutely. I would absolutely accept that. Anybody that, if that were to happen, anybody that would rise to the hour and rise to the occasion and stand up and say, I am here to be a leader for the defense and the prosperity and the unity of all Israeli people, Jews, Muslims, Christians. I myself am a Arab Muslim, but Arab Israeli Muslim, but I am the Prime Minister of Israel and all of the Israeli people. And I am the Prime Minister for all Israelis. It doesn't, not Jew, whatever. I represent the people of Israel. That I would absolutely 100% endorse something like that. Yeah, I would. I would. Now, do you see anybody on the Palestinian side offering the same thing? Like, seriously offering it? I mean, seriously wanting... people like I've heard a few people say, the Palestinians just want to live in a democratic, free country, just like America, where they're equal, and... No, they don't. No, they don't. At all. And they never have. They never even said they did. They never said they wanted to. The two-state solution is dead. It's completely dead. But not because of the Jews, but because of the Palestinians. Because of their refusal to accept any sort of a Jewish state in the land. That's why. That's why there's no peace. And so, what it comes down to in the end here then, ultimately, is that you have this gridlock between Palestinians who want their home back and want to create a Palestine free and autonomous and sovereign and liberated, etc., as if it was just like it used to be before the Zionists came, There's that vision, and that they need to intifada, they need to violently shake off the Zionist oppression and free themselves to once again be a strong and proud people of Palestine. Except for the fact that there's never been a Palestinian people in that sense, and that there's never been a nation of Palestine. Because the name Palestine is simply a regional name that was given to numerous different rulers who ruled over that area, originating with the name Syria and Palestine, given to the land by the Romans as a way to separate the Jewish connection in the land, to further humiliate the Jews who they had conquered and destroyed their sovereign state and the temple in Jerusalem, and exiled 980,000 Jews all over their empire, which is why there's Jews all over the world now. That's the reason for the Jewish diaspora. And ever since then, Jews have longed to return to their land. But the thing is, The thing is with that the problem with that is, right, that there's never been an independent Palestinian, like, actual nation. It was a regional name. So that's for one thing. The other thing is, this whole notion of this ancient Palestinian civilization also is rubbish, because there's literally no evidence whatsoever for such a place. And again, until Yasser Arafat came up with the whole idea, it was never even a concept. The Palestinians themselves didn't even think of themselves in that way. So the whole notion of a independent, all Palestinian, golden age to return the land to is nonsense. But also, there are people, I'm not going to deny this, there are people on the Zionist side who do want to make it all, Arab-Rhine, Arab-free, and purely Jewish, and there's no Arabs and no Muslims, no Christians, just all Jew. There is that side. I'm not going to deny that exists. Yes, that side does exist. And I find that side abhorrent. I find that side despicable. I find that side disgusting and racist. And I will not stand behind it. Because, yet again, I do not want an Arab-Rhine Israel. I don't want Israel to be Arab-Rhine, to be Arab-free. I don't want Israel to be non-Arab, to be no Christians, no Arabs. I want there to be Arabs living in Israel. I want there to be Christians in Israel. I want there to be a free, democratic, multicultural Israel, where all people are united under a single proud Israeli identity, regardless of their individual ethnicities, just like we do here in the United States of America. Now, are there issues and challenges with the idea of it being a Jewish state and still being a state for all its citizens? Yes, of course. But the solution is not to just reject either one in toto and say no to either one and to just give up. Oh, well, to do both things is going to be really hard. So let's just not think about it and just not even try at all. What kind of childish nonsense and stupidity is that? And I call out both sides. I call out the Israeli side, the Zionist side, and the Palestinian, the Arab side. I call out both for their mistakes. I call out both for their misjudgments. And like I said, I do not want one completely to dominate over the other. That's not my goal. But unfortunately, the ideology of the Palestinians, Palestinianism, is that that's the only way. That is the only way. It has to go back to the Palestinian Arabs completely, 100%. And the Jews, they just go back to Poland or wherever they're from. Well, you can't ever have peace when there's no budging, when there's no compromise. There has to be compromise, inevitably, whether you want it to or not. I'm not even talking about, well, even in the sense of fairness and justice even, just mere practicality. Eventually it has to eventually come down to something. It can't just stay the status quo like this forever indefinitely. It has to end at some point. And I am going to tell you this, it is most definitely not going to end with the extermination and eradication of the Jewish people from that land, from their homeland. But it is also equally not going to end with the complete and total eradication, extermination, expulsion of Arabs, whether they be Muslim Arabs, Christian Arabs, whatever, but of Arabs in the land. It's not going to happen. Either side can have either side's version of extremists can have their weird fever dreams of this fantastical utopia that they think is going to happen someday if they hold on to it, and dig in their heels long enough. But it's not, okay? And I'm just going to end with this. For those of you that do want Israel to be all Jewish and we'll just kick all the Arabs out, let me ask you, okay, and then to the Arabs, to the Palestinians, their supporters, who want to just kick out all the Jews and make it all Palestine. I have a question for both sides, for both of you. Isn't the future of our children more important than your petty, stupid, tribal bickering? How much more blood of Jewish children has to run in the streets? How many more Palestinian families have to be blown up and bombed and decimated? How many more Palestinians have to be forced to be human shields in the way of terror from their sick, evil, twisted leaders who use them as pawns and weapons in a never-ending war against Israel and the Jewish people? How much more Jewish blood has to be shed? How much more Arab blood has to be shed? How many more Arab Palestinian babies need to be slaughtered and bombed? And how many more Israelis need to be burned alive and raped and decapitated and slaughtered and murdered? How many more people have to die before we learn that this land belongs ultimately to both of us? And we either will learn to share it and live in peace and put this shit behind us, or we'll just continue to fight over and over and over again. Well, you know what? I'm sick of that shit. And you know what? For the future of our children and the future of their children and future generations, I implore you, everybody, please, let's work this shit out. I know it won't be easy. I know it'll be hard. But the only other alternative is war and more bloodshed and more suffering. Don't our children deserve better? Like Rabbi Sachs said, and I'll say this he said of Palestinian children, but I'll also say it of Jewish children as well. Palestinian children deserve a future. Jewish children, Israeli children deserve a future. Period. Full stop. And with that, I end my explanation of Palestinianism and why it's an obstacle to peace. And some ideas, some thoughts on how we can maybe try and start to figure this shit out. I wish we could, you know what? I wish we could make that into a slogan. Like in Hebrew and then in English, Let's figure this shit out. Oh, we can't say shit, but let's figure this out, Wouldn't that be an awesome slogan? I wonder what that would be in Hebrew. That'd be so cool in Hebrew. I don't know what it'd be in Hebrew. It'd be like, "B'chutz v'chad lakari," or something. Anyway, it is my most heartfelt prayer that with God's help, we see an end to violence and we see a beginning of the long and difficult road, but necessary road to peace. God bless you. God bless everybody. I love all of you, and guys and gals and anything and everything in between. Look forward to new videos, and yeah, God bless you, and I love you all.